Hi everyone, welcome back to the Abyss of Nothingness. Today we'll be talking about CDs. But not this kind. If you're at all familiar with some of my previous videos, or this gangly appearance, it shouldn't be a surprise to you that I'm a decently big fan of Nintendo. The Wii and DS were huge parts of my childhood, and despite some of the company's shortcomings, the Wii U, I've remained a fan of their games to this very day. And no matter what kind of opinion you have on Nintendo as a business, it's nearly impossible to understate the impact they've had on both gaming and mainstream culture in general. They're responsible for some of the greatest and most innovative video games of all time, for an abundance of unique characters and worlds to explore, and for everyone's crippling debt. At least I know the money went toward a charitable cause. All of this is to say that if you were to experience any Nintendo game nowadays, you're more than likely going to have a quality experience. But they didn't start that way. Once Nintendo ditched the playing card industry, meddled with toys, and finally struck gold with video games, they still had to face a few growing pains. The NES Power Glove, the 64DD, the Virtual Boy. Oh God, the Virtual Boy!
Coming to Nintendo Classics.
What the f***? But many, and possibly Nintendo themselves, would argue that the absolute worst thing that they have ever been involved in has to be...
Join me, Link, and I will make your face the greatest in Korodai, or else you will die.
Yeah, that. This absolute monstrosity comes from the CDI, a PC gaming hybrid console from the 90s developed by Philips and Sony. This partnership with the console came about after Nintendo and Sony fell out of a deal to create a CD add-on for the SNES, resulting in Sony creating only Nintendo's worst enemy. They say that you reap what you sow. Nintendo then went to Philips to develop the player, but after a deal too fell through, Philips would gain a license to use certain Nintendo characters in their own games for the CDI. And thus, we got 4 Nintendo-related games with very little input from the company themselves, aka premium grade nightmare fuel. These games have since been casted as the black sheep of Nintendo by not only fans, but also Nintendo themselves, and despite the many risks involved, I want to figure out why for myself. So today, I'll be taking a closer look at these 4 games to figure out how truly frightening they are, as well as why Nintendo wants you to forget about them so bad. But before I continue, I should state that while I am technically able to try out these games myself through totally legal ways, I don't think a keyboard and trackpad on a MacBook is the best way to experience these games. And if I wanted an actual CDI with all 4 games, I'd have to declare bankruptcy a few times over. So this video will be more of a history of these games rather than a full review with my own experiences with them. My thoughts on these games will be based on watching gameplay, reading reviews, and other first-hand experiences I can find, all of which will be linked in the description. And finally, shout out to NintendoComplete for not only playing through all 4 of these games, but for also uploading them in their entirety to YouTube for all of us to, well, enjoy, I guess. So with all of that out of the way, let's begin this treacherous journey with our first game, Link: The Faces of Evil.
Hey!
Oh, God! Link: The Faces of Evil was released on the CDI in October of 1993 and was developed by Animation Magic. The game has you play as Link as he travels to the land of Korodai after a prophecy proclaims that only he can stop Ganon, who's taken over the island. After he goes on a few quests and Princess Zelda is imprisoned, Link must defeat the 5 Faces of Evil before facing Ganon himself. The story of this game isn't too dissimilar from most Zelda games, but where this game really shines, or blinds rather, is in the game's cutscenes.
How about a kiss for luck?
You've got to be kidding.
Every time Link completes a quest or uses his smart sword to interact with an NPC, the player is instantly greeted by the topic of their next therapy session. The animations in this game are pretty atrocious, to say the least. Most of the character designs are okay, if not a little off from what you'd expect from Zelda, but the animations themselves are just fluid messes. The constant zooming, the strange perspectives, and all the unnecessary movements place these animations into the deepest depths of the uncanny valley. And the fact that they're just pasted directly onto the level's background instead of having actual backdrops makes them feel really cheap as well. But the worst offender in these animations, for me personally, has to be Link himself. He almost always has a blank expression on his face, and while his voice is upbeat, he always has a deadpan delivery, whether he's just talking to locals,
Wow, thanks!
or if he just got through a very intense boss battle.
Lucky shot! Golly!
Then again, I can't really blame the voice actor here, as he was apparently only given 15 minutes to rehearse all of his lines before recording all of them. But enough about the animations for now. This video is about the actual game, so how was the game itself? It looks fine. Instead of going for the traditional top-down method like in most Zelda games, Faces of Evil goes for a side-scrolling perspective like in Zelda 2. The gameplay here is pretty basic as well. You can swing your sword, block by standing still, use bombs and other items from your magic pouch, and you can duck walk. Their words, not mine.
You can make me do the duck walk!
However, these controls were widely criticized for how janky the movements felt and for how pretty much every action was mapped to 2 buttons. This combined with limited retries and how enemies would randomly and infinitely spawn made it really easy to die at a moment's notice. A lot of the levels also feel aimless, with confusing terrain that's hard to traverse since there's very little perspective in this game. The later levels do remedy things a bit, but it's still a big problem when most of your game contains all these issues. I've ragged on a lot about this game so far, but to my surprise, there were actually quite a few things I ended up liking about it. Aside from the cutscenes, a lot of the art in this game is actually quite impressive. The map and most of the levels have great looking backgrounds, and once you get to the Faces of Fear levels, they become quite creative and fit their characters well. The soundtrack is also fairly decent, and while some songs do get a little repetitive, they still fit well into the game's atmosphere. And despite some of their horrid animations, I enjoyed most of the villains' designs, especially those for Harlequin and Militron.
Oh my goodness, this is awful!
I did not need to see that though. So yeah, Faces of Evil is far from anything revolutionary and has plenty of flaws, but I think the game looks fine for what it is, and even a little impressive for the hardware it was on. It's very easy to understand why the game lives in infamy today, and I'm certainly not clamoring to play it anytime soon, but I don't think the game looks nearly as bad as some claim it to be. It's still not great though, I think that goes without saying. However, one thing I forgot to mention is that Animation Magic didn't just produce one game, they produced twins.
Come on!
Jeez! That one wasn't as bad, but still. On the exact same day as Faces of Evil's release, Zelda the Wand of Gamelon was also released on the CDI. Instead of playing as Link, this game saw you play as Zelda? That's right. Before Echoes of Wisdom, and another game I'll get to later, Wand of Gamelon was the first Legend of Zelda game that let you play as its titular character. God, that sounds dirty. And unlike the Pokemon Duel releases of today, this game featured a completely different story from Faces of Evil. This time around, King Harkinian and Link have both disappeared after traveling to the land of Gamelon, so Zelda must venture there herself to save them from Ganon. The story here is a bit more loose compared to Faces of Evil, but that's mostly made up for with how great most of the levels look. Although I did praise the previous game for its artwork, the levels in this game feel a lot more vibrant and fleshed out. They do suffer from many of the same pitfalls as the previous game, but the visuals here are a noticeable improvement. And just like Faces of Evil, Wand of Gamelon has plenty of cutscenes as well. And somehow, someway, I think they're even worse here. There's still plenty of zooms and unnecessary movements, but these animations look even more crude, with some of them having really poor frame rate. And just like her personal knight, Zelda feels completely soulless in several cutscenes.
You've killed me!
Good.
But other than those and other minor differences, this is pretty much the exact same game. It has the same attacks, most of the same enemies, and many of the same problems within the gameplay department. Though levels here are more visually appealing, but you're more than likely going to have the exact same experiences no matter which game you play. I do wish they gave Zelda a more unique moveset, but considering how Animation Magic had to finish both of these games within a year's time, it's not surprising that things turned out this way. But like the previous game, Wand of Gamelon looks like a fine game for what it is, but I do think I'd give the edge to Faces of Evil for having a more defined story. And despite their flaws, I don't think either of these games deserve to be considered as some of the worst video games of all time, as there are plenty of other games that I guarantee are far worse than these. Those animations are going to haunt me forever though. The games reportedly sold fine upon release, but fell short in sales compared to most Nintendo titles. Reviews for the games were also pretty mixed at the time, with some praising the game for its breathtaking animated sequences, while others, including the CDI magazine, were much more critical of the games. Reviews are much more negative nowadays, but the game's cutscenes have taken on a new life of popularity due to their use in YouTube poop culture. There would be one more Zelda game released on the CDI, but before then, we'd get one other Nintendo-related game, this time featuring everyone's favorite plumber.
I don't know, Mario, just trust me, I got a good feeling about this.
Close, but no. The next game in this gauntlet of uncanniness is Hotel Mario, which released in July of 1994 and was developed by Fantasy Factory. The game follows a similar format to most Mario games, with Mario and Luigi having to save Princess Peach after she gets captured by Bowser. But instead of venturing through various lands and castles, you make your way through 7 different hotels run by Bowser and the 7 Koopalings. Except for Iggy. F that guy, I guess. And of course, this game also has its fair share of cutscenes, which are easily the most well known out of any of these games. For better or worse. However, and this may be because it got a little stir crazy with the Zelda cutscenes, but I don't think these ones are nearly as bad. Sure, it's impossible to watch these today with a straight face, but the art style doesn't feel nearly as off and reminds me quite a bit of the Super Mario World cartoons. The animations also don't have many strange movements and have actual unique backgrounds to them, so these are a decent upgrade from the last 2 games. That being said, there is a reason why these have become so infamous.
You bring a light? No.
The character models, especially for Mario, look janky most of the time, and that combined with the low frame rate, the absolutely terrifying freeze frames, and how often they speak directly to the camera creates a recipe for disaster. And speaking of, well, the voice acting is pretty subpar and awkward, with Mario's voice reminding me more of Mario than the actual Super Mario.
Check out the enclosed instruction book.
They're obviously a fun watch nowadays and are much better than the Zelda cutscenes, but that really isn't saying much. As for the gameplay, it looks decent as well. Each hotel aside from Bowser's has 10 stages, with each having you close every door in the level while dodging enemies that can reopen them. There are a few power-ups like super mushrooms and fire flowers, but if you get hit enough times or end up with every door opened, you lose the level. Sure, closing doors isn't the most fascinating gameplay experience or anything, but if I'm being honest, this game looks like a fun time. It starts as a pretty simple puzzle game with limited controls, but I could see this being a fun time killer. Each hotel has a different theme, such as a treehouse theme for Morton or Larry's Ice Hotel featuring refrigerators as doors, as well as different obstacles, such as a cloud blocking your vision and the power occasionally going out.
Haha, here's the problem. You know what they say, all toasters toast toast.
I mean, yeah, someone probably said that. However, there is a pretty noticeable change in difficulty as you move through the game. While enemies like Goombas and Koopas don't do much, you then get the bombs that fly in and explode, and the bullet bills that randomly shoot across the screen. More and more enemies and doors spawn as you get further in the game, and just by watching these later levels, you can tell they're a pain in the ass to get through. But these defects are only amplified once you get to Bowser's Seizures Palace. Jesus Christ. While no actual seizures take place, you still have to deal with 15 levels, a shit ton of doors on every level, and every previous enemy returning in some way. So yeah, this game is pretty rudimentary with plenty of bad cutscenes and seems to become a pain to get through as time goes on. But it's still very easily the best of these games so far. It's far from anything amazing, and I could see it getting tiring after a while, but I would honestly like to try it out sometime. For a decent price. The hotels are well themed, the cutscenes are the definition of so bad it's good, and the gameplay looks the most engaging out of any of these games. However, the critical response to Hotel Mario was pretty similar to the Zelda titles, with a decent mix of positive and middling reviews upon release. It has since been described as one of the worst Mario games ever released, with many attacking the game's controls as well as how the premise was literally closing doors. Yeah, I can't really argue with that last point. 2 more Mario games, Super Mario's Wacky Worlds and Mario Takes America, were planned to release on the CDI, but were ultimately cancelled due to the console's decline in sales. Alright, we have now reached the final Nintendo CDI game, and once again, it's a Zelda game. So for my own sanity, I'm going to avert my eyes so I don't get jump scared again by some ominous, horrifying, and stupid anime.
There will be no more viewing tonight, and so I found this champion of strength and courage.
What the f***? Zelda's Adventure was released sometime in 1994 on the CDI, and was developed by the Veritas Corporation instead of Animation Magic. And yeah, we may as well get the elephant out of the way. Instead of creating the game using digital artwork and sprites, Zelda's Adventure used actual pictures and video to create digitized sprites. And I'm not just talking about the human characters here, as while the budget for this game was reportedly pretty small, Veritas went all out for it. Jason Bakudis, a Hollywood special effects designer, was hired to create models for the buildings, their interiors, as well as all the monsters. He'd then employ stop-motion techniques to create several frames for the monsters, which were then turned into sprites for the game. The backgrounds were created from photos taken around the Los Angeles area with models placed over top, which were all put together to form an entire map to explore. While I don't think this style translates well into video games, especially with how blurry everything turned out to be, I do have a lot of respect for how much effort went into designing this game. Stop-motion animation has always been fascinating to me, and getting to see the models outside of the game helped me appreciate them a lot more. And then there's the game itself. The story begins when an astronomer named Gasper learns that Ganon, spelled with an extra N, has kidnapped Link and the 7 celestial signs. He then tasks Zelda to explore the land of Tolamak to retrieve the celestial signs and save Link from Ganon's clutches. Then, after a nearly 5-minute long tutorial that strongly resembles a corporate training video, we can finally explore Tolamak. Oh dear god. The game returns to the top-down perspective of the very first Zelda game, but the load times here are absolutely atrocious. You have to wait around 5 seconds each time you move to a different area, which is not only longer than the NES game, but also kills the immersion. Zelda's sprite also clashes with the backgrounds in most areas, while the NPCs and enemies blend in well. Sometimes too well. The gameplay itself is pretty similar to the original Zelda game, with you slashing enemies and collecting rupees along the way. You can speak with NPCs throughout the game as well, who thankfully don't have full cutscenes, but do have extremely subpar and faint dialogue without any captions.
Welcome to the Moblins Head Inn, my princess. Have a cup of Andor cider on the house.
Is that guy wearing a baseball cap? You then travel to 7 shrines spread across the map, which do have some decent designs. Once you reclaim all the signs and defeat Ganon, peace is restored to Tolamak, and Link is saved. So Zelda's Adventure is certainly one of the games of all time. I still respect all of the effort that went into the models for the game, but from the gameplay I've seen of this, it looks borderline unplayable. The gameplay looks fine, but with how poor the models look in game, combined with the massive load times, make this game feel really primitive. And what really sucks about this is that most involved with the game seem to have a really fun time making it. But when it came down to the finished product, the CDI just couldn't handle it. And as for critical response, to absolutely no one's surprise, it got panned! Most criticize the blurry graphics and long load times, with many today considering it to be one of the worst games of all time. The game also released around the time the CDI was being discontinued in the US, which caused for low sales and a hefty resale price. Zelda's Adventure would be the final Nintendo-adjacent game released on the CDI, and Nintendo themselves still refuse to acknowledge the 4 games' existence to this very day. And with that, we have now made it through every Nintendo-related game released on the CDI. That was something. When I started working on this video, I was expecting to bear witness to some of the worst video games ever made, but outside of most of the cutscenes, and pretty much the entirety of Zelda's Adventure, I don't think these look nearly as bad. They all definitely have their fair share of problems, but I liked most of their premises, and I could see the first 3 being enjoyed much more if Nintendo themselves produced them. However, while I do respect the ambition of Zelda's Adventure, I don't see that kind of art style transferring well into a Zelda game, no matter who's involved in its creation. And for all that I've criticized the animations in these games, I can't deny how revolutionary they were for their time. In a time of 16 and 32-bit systems, these were some of the first games to have fully animated and voiced cutscenes. It's just too bad they happened to age terribly. However, the biggest factor that held these games back from being truly good was, well, the CDI itself. The console was severely underpowered compared to most other systems at the time, with a set of controllers that were all criticized for their delayed and messy inputs. And not to mention, who the hell even owned a CDI? The console only sold around 1 million units in its decade-long lifespan, which mainly came down to its initial $799 price tag. And if we adjust that for inflation, it would be around the same price as 4 Nintendo Switch 2s. Now that's what I like to call a ripoff. But even for the relative obscurity of these games, they've still managed to build a decent cult following. I've already mentioned the memification of the animations, but the first two Zelda titles have a particularly strong rapport among fans. So much so that in late 2020, full unofficial remakes of the games were developed and released by Dopply, an indie game developer. This led to him creating a new game, Arzette the Jewel of Faramore, which was based entirely on the styles of Faces of Evil and One of Gamelon. It really has been interesting to learn about these titles and their legacies, and while the games themselves were strange, to say the least, I'm glad that many still managed to find enjoyment in them, ironically or not. But perhaps the strangest thing about any of these CDI games is whatever the hell this scene was in Zelda's Adventure.
Radical, dude, totally!
Anyway, thank you all for watching, I hope you all enjoyed, and subscribe to NintendoComplete. They deserve it for playing through all these games. Take care.
Everybody move to the Zelda rap. Rap, rap, do the rap. Everybody go!